Hey, party people. This is your friendly neighborhood over-caffeinated fashion design and illustration professor Zoe Hong. Today, I'm going to teach you how I like to do super elongated 11 head figures. Like this one. This is a very exaggerated look, and I personally like these figures for evening wear because the drama of a lot of evening wear lends itself really well to these very dramatic figures. But of course, feel free to use them however you like once you've learned how to do them. Let's go over materials really quick. First of all, you're gonna need some tracing paper. I don't have a super huge preference on tracing paper. This is the Blick brand. I got a bunch of these pads when they were on sale a few months ago. This is a good brand. As long as the tracing paper is not too plasticky like vellum, any tracing paper is fine. You can also get tracing paper on a roll, whatever. You know, longtime viewers know that I prefer mechanical pencils to regular pencils because I'm too lazy to sharpen pencils most of the time. Now, I use a B.5 because I want it to be dark enough so that my lines will show up on camera really well. But when I'm not on camera and I'm starting a croquis from scratch, I will use a much lighter, skinnier pencil like a 0.3 HB lead. So I do recommend you use a harder lead, a lighter lead when you're first sketching. My two favorite erasers in the world. This is the Pentel Click. You can find these at, a lot of sort of office supply stores like Office Max, Office Depot, and they're good. You can get these refills. This is a Tombow Mono Zero, super skinny 0.4, super skinny erasing. And then for corrections work, these are Pilot Color Enos. They are colored mechanical pencils. They're a little bit on the thick side, but for corrections work, they're excellent and they're erasable. They're erasable like pencil. If you grind down and draw really hard, then it's hard to erase completely, much like regular graphite pencil. If you draw kind of regular light, they are erasable. If you do not have access to these color pencils, I ordered these on Amazon. These are also good. This is a Pilot G2 with a 0.38 point. You can write really skinny with these. This is a clear graph ruler, and this is my favorite kind of ruler for 99.9% of what I do, except for when I'm cutting boards. I like to have a cork back metal ruler, and I have 17,000 of these. I'm fairly certain that I single-handedly keep the clear graph ruler industry in business. And most importantly, visual references. Doesn't matter what you draw, whether you draw ducks, whether you draw people, whether you draw dish towels. If you want to learn how to draw something, you need to go look at the thing you're trying to draw. Period. After a while, after you've practiced a lot, you can start drawing from memory. But even people who have been drawing for 40 years, if they want to draw a person, they want to draw a particular pose, they prefer drawing in front of a visual reference, a live model, etc., etc. Oh, and I forgot tape. I'm going to need some tape, drafting tape, nothing like Scotch tapes, clear tape, something substantial. And I like to get some lint on it, get some fuzzy stuff on it so that it's not so sticky, that it'll peel up easily. Bing. Fuzzy. I'm going to show you two methods on how to approach figures. I have a 4-step croquis building process. It's in my female fashion figures playlist. I have a male series, a male fashion figures playlist. You can go watch those for a deep dive on the process. I'm going to show you the basics of how I do the 4 steps for 11 head figures. And then I'm going to show you a second method after that. The first thing you want to do is figure out where your plumb line is, where your center of gravity is, okay? How you're balanced when you're standing. or how your model is balanced when they're standing. To get an idea of this, I want you to stand up, and I want you to stand with your feet planted about shoulder width, with your weight evenly distributed on both feet. The center of your body, because your body is symmetrical right now, the center of your body is your center of gravity, and that's where your plumb line is. Now, I want you to pick up one foot and try to balance, okay? Balance on one leg. You'll notice that your torso immediately shifted over the foot that is still on the ground, because now your center of gravity needs to be different to make sure you stay standing upright. Here, her body is balanced over this foot. See how just her tippy toe is balanced there, but the weight is really on this foot. And so her center of gravity is centered over this foot. To mark your plumb line, you take your suprasternal notch, which is that little divot in between your clavicles. That's the base of your neck. Here's your weight ankle, so the center of your weight ankle. There's your center of gravity and your plumb line. Now, your center front is completely different. If you're standing straight up and down and your body is symmetrical, then yeah, your center front will align with your center of gravity. But she's shifted over, she's twisting her torso, and so they're not aligned. A lot of fashion figures are like that, right? So you can see, I picked this picture because it's so clear where her center front is. There's her belly button. You can see the line dividing her abs. There's the center of her crotch. So we can start building this curve in here. That's the center of her breasts. That's the base of her neck. There's her center front. If she was wearing a very form-fitted shirt, this is where her buttons would be sitting along the front. Now, we're going to do an 11 head figure. So the first thing we need to do is measure her head so that we could figure out what 11 heads looks like. So take your graph ruler and run that line along the center of her face, not along the plumb line, but the center of her face. She's angled this way, but I'm not measuring her head like this. I'm measuring her head along her vertical. If you can't figure out where the top of her head is because she has a very elaborate hairstyle, remember that the eye line sits at the center of the head, not the center of the face, but the center of the head. And so I'm gonna say that she's like 7/8 of an inch. Her head is about 7/8 of an inch. Please do write your numbers. I find that students will occasionally make that mistake where they misjudged which one it was. And then I flip it to the back because no matter how much erasing I do on the figure, I will retain my number line. We're going to be tracing parts and moving the line up and down to elongate the figure in this method. When we're doing this method, make sure that your plumb lines are always matched up so that you only see one line. You don't ever want to start shifting the plumb line so that you're moving and changing the body. We could do that later on if you want to adjust the figure to match your image, your customer, your muse better. You're gonna drop that one mark right at the bottom of her head. Here is her head. There's the center line for her head. There's her eye line. The 2 mark is gonna sit at the top of her breasts where a strapless dress would sit, this strapless bikini top. That's going to be the 2 mark. The angle of her bust should be perpendicular to her center front, 90-degree angle. Also, the angle of her hips should be 90-degree angle, okay? So, we don't have to move it that much. Her breasts are in here. Her center front is here. I draw breasts and then I draw shoulders because some people, you can drop your shoulders for more proper posture, elongated neck. You can pick up your shoulders for certain poses. So her shoulder is up here And then her other shoulder is down here. So she's clearly kind of picked this shoulder up for this pose. And there's her clavicle. There's her neck. Since this is the base of her neck, make sure that her neck is like symmetrical and is kind of sitting on evenly on either side. Waist is at 3. I'm gonna drop that a little bit. I'm shortening her torso a bit. She is rather long torsoed. Make sure your plumb line is matched up. There's her waist. There's her rib cage in here. And then when I mark her waist, I mark her elbows, and I always mark the entire width of the elbow so I know how wide to make the body parts. Continue her center front. Here's 4 and here's 5, and on women, I like the crotch to be in between 4 1/4 and 4 1/2. That's not 1/4 of an inch, that's 1/4 of the space. So there's about half the space, and there's about 1/4 of the space. So I want the crotch to be here. And let's make it we can make it a kind of in between. Make sure those plumb lines are matched up. There's that. We're gonna complete her center front line. Her hips are at the same angle as that. You know, her pelvic box sits in there like so. And then when I mark the crotch, I also like to mark the wrists. So there's that. Hand gesture. I do have a drawing hands video if you are interested in learning more about drawing hands. Knees, the top of her knee. So there's her knee, right? And there's her other knee. We go by the knee of the weight leg because this one is straight up and down. This one is foreshortened. So using the foreshortened leg for proportions will give you wonky legs. So using the weight leg that's straight up and down, the 6 mark is going to be at the top of the knee. There's 6. There's the top of the knee. There's the angle of her thigh. Then you mark the other knee in relation to that one and the angle of her thigh. I tend to keep the torso fairly realistic in proportion because that's where a lot of the design goes. And then usually skirts are just long, pants are just long, whatever, you know? So the weight ankle is gonna be at the 10 mark. And at this point, you might be thinking, oh my God, that is so much calf. It's like double the length. And yeah, I know, it's a very exaggerated. So there's the ankle, and then here's the other ankle in relation to the other one. So always do the weight leg first, and then here's your foot, drops right to that 11 mark, and this one back here. And here is the pose translated directly onto an 11 head proportioned figure. At this stage, I would fold it over, or if you can't, you can use some of that tape, and you're gonna follow the rest of the 4-step process, building the body out, adding anatomy, and editing and perfecting the figure. Those 4 steps are made for beginners, and if you feel like you've been practicing for a long time and you can skip a couple of steps or whatnot, be my guest. That's what I do. Building the body means you're just making a little robotic version. You're not worrying about anatomy. You're fleshing things out in order to build the anatomy on top. Sometimes for this part, I will use a ruler because the lengths are so freaking long. I want to make this knee the same size as the other knee. She does have quite the thigh gap, so I'm going to give her that. Really using the width of those markers. The 3rd step is adding anatomy, and I'm going to show you how I use the little robot legs underneath to help me. So with any leg, you're going to curve out the hip. You're going to curve in. The outside of the knee is straight. High curve on the outside, low ankle bone. This one you can't really see, but this one is a really good example. Again, curve out, in, outside of the knee is straight, high curve on the calf on the outside. On the inside, it curves in, and the inside of the knee is round. And then there's a dip, and there's a low curve on that calf. High curve on the outside, low curve on the inside, high ankle bone, okay? Now, I've seen these like broken ankle type looking feet. That's not what I mean. The angle is very slight on those ankles, very slight. I typically draw the weight leg first, so curving out, there's the hip. We curve in, outside of the knee is straight. And we're gonna mark that right. Like you can add fat to the thigh, but I want you to keep your knees about the same width as before. You're gonna high curve that calf. This is the outside of the ankle bone. But notice how here's the outside, and then the calf gets skinnier than the ankle. So about 2/3 of the way down, we're gonna cross that line and then flare back out for the ankle. So here, cross that line, curve in and out, and then your foot. Inside, we have that's gonna be the widest part of the thigh, and we curve in. Inside of the knee is round, but we're following the width that we established from before. We dip in. Now, there's that line. We're gonna touch that line. Okay. There's our kneecap. We're gonna touch that line, but not cross it. We're gonna go in, and then we're gonna flare back out for the other half of the ankle. And there's your leg. And that's how you use that little robot leg underneath to help you add your anatomy. For the other leg, okay, again, outside, curve, add some fat, straight on the outside, curving out. About 2/3 of the way in, we're going to curve back in and get a little narrower and come back out for the ankle. Again, curving, round on the inside. We're gonna dip and we're gonna touch that line, but not cross it. And then we're gonna come in. There's her ankle. You know, they're really pushing against each other, not overlapping right in this section. So you see my red line and my pencil line. And then this foot is not as foreshortened, right? She's like on her tippy toe here. Okay. And then the fourth step is perfecting the pose and adjusting for your muse or customer. And at this stage, it's like, oh, you know, my customer is very, very thin, so maybe you carve out some of the fat. Maybe your customer is much, you know, curvier, and you want to add more. Add a little bit more upper arm, you know, give her a slightly larger breast, a little bit more fat in here, give her a little bit more hip. Round that out. Still keep the knee close to the same. I'm gonna bridge some of that thigh gap in there. I'm going to bring out the calf a hair. When we're adding and subtracting, we're talking like tiny bits. So we're going on the outside of that line. Slightly softer, plushier version of that figure. Another thing I like to do in self-editing is to flip the figure over to check for errors. Now, the psychology behind that is when you're working on a figure and you're working and you're staring at it, your brain and your eyes get used to the errors. and your brain starts adjusting for it and getting used to it, and it starts to think that's the new normal. And so later on, when you're at step 4, it's really hard to edit and really look for mistakes. But when you flip the figure over, it's almost like looking at a new figure and the mistakes jump out at you. Like, oh no, your kneecap should be down here, and I want the curve to be a little bit lower here, and and you can really look for the errors in that way. Give her a tiny bit more head. If you want more in-depth anatomy videos, I have them. I'm going to drop links to everything below. The process for doing side and back view figures are exactly the same. Okay, you start by choosing an excellent visual reference, figuring out your center of gravity. So her hair is kind of in the way, but we can, you can see a distinct angle. So we're gonna draw her head in here, just inside her hairdo. And we've got the angle of her shoulders. You can see her spine in here. So there's the curvature of her spine, and there's her butt crack, and that's the base of her neck. All her weight is on this foot. See how she's just balancing on her toes here? So there's her weight ankle. So there's that. There's it's Talk Like a Pirate Day. There's the base of her neck. There's her weight ankle. And here is your plumb line. So here's your center back line. Okay, that's where a zipper would sit along a tight bodycon dress. And then angle of her shoulders, there's her weight. There's her center of gravity. And then you can proceed from there. On the side view, it's a little bit different because we're not working with the suprasternal notch. We're still at the center of the neck. And then I chose this pose on purpose because she's not exactly balanced on one foot. Most of her weight is on this leg. Some of it is on this leg. Like this foot is planted. It's not like these where it's just her toe is there, but this foot is planted down. There's her neck in here like that. The center of her neck is about here. This is where most of her weight is, but some of her weight is in there. So I'm going to make the center of gravity a little bit in front. Okay, it's a little bit distributed. That is going to be my plumb line for this figure. And you might be wondering, well, that makes her crooked on the page. It's like, no, she's photoshopped, okay? They could do whatever the hell they want in Photoshop. We're trying to make it look kind of real. I do have more in-depth videos on side view figures, back view figures, both male and female. So go check out my fashion figure playlist for those videos. Now I'm going to show you how to do these without using the tracing method. You're still going to have to figure out the plumb line and the center front. So here's her suprasternal notch. Here's the center of her breasts. This is great because she's wearing a V-neck, so now you know where her center is. There's her breast there. Her side seam is probably sitting about there. Her crotch is in here like this. There's her butt, so I'm going to say it's sitting like that. And there's her center front. There, okay. This is a perfect side view leg, so she's a little bit twisted on the front. So here is where her outseam on her pants would sit. And she's coming forward like Z's. And then we're going to mark our number line. We don't have to measure her head because we're not tracing. We're not doing the trace and drop method. I'm just going to do 7/8 of an inch. And again, on this side. Now, this is still your plumb line. And so you're going to use that as a reference point. Her entire head is touching the plumb line on one side. And it's dipping below. Another way you can approach that is draw her breasts first. Remember that 2 mark is where her strapless dress would sit, so about here. And this is her plumb line. Her center front is like way over here. Her breast is here. Do you see the relationship? And then this one is much flatter. It's more of an ovoid because you're only seeing part of it. And then her rib cage is at 3. And then her shoulders are above that. Following this angle, you're following this angle of her shoulders. You're gonna see this, and you're gonna see this space, right? So space, shoulder, it's coming down pretty straight. Elbow is just past the waist curve. And then her arm is up here. Honestly, I hate these raised arm poses. I'd probably drop it if I was going to use this pose in real life. There's her suprasternal notch. There's how her neck picks up. Her chin is kind of close to her shoulder, right? So it's here. It's not going to go all the way up to the 0 point because her head is dropped, right? And her ear is like crossing this line. She's in here like this. Okay, so use your reference points. If you wanted to make this arm happen, 4.5, 4.25. Her side seam is on the other side of the plumb line. It's curving, curving, curving. There's the bottom of her crotch. You know, do. Her butt is kind of sticking out like this, you know, well, maybe not that much. And then her forearm drops in front of it. Her wrist is right at crotch level. Okay, it's a little bit longer because she's dropped her shoulder and arching her back a lot. So there's her hand. This point is this distance from the center front. So we're here and here and here. And that's her side seam. Notice how her side seam crosses the plumb line just under her breast. Here we are. There's her side seam. Now, her knee, the top of her knee is at 6, right? So here's 6. And it's crossing the plumb line. So we're about here. So we're here. And we're here. Ankle is at 10. Remember, it's just off on one side. And then this leg, it's pretty much level. We're out here. The knee is coming up, not as far as the elbow. Okay, so about here. People forget that there's so much support structure in our knees. Muscles, ligaments, cartilage, all this bone. They need to be thick, our knees. And some people make the mistake of making knees really skinny to make legs look skinny. But look, if you have like a nicely proportioned thigh and then a really skinny knee, your thigh is going to look fat in comparison. So draw enough girth to the knee. And then her ankle is a little bit higher. This angle is about that angle. We're checking our proportions. People like to draw, I've seen this a lot with like anime stuff, cartoony stuff where they draw calves like this. But look at her calves. She curves out. Feel your own calves. Feel your own shins. There's muscle in the front. There's flesh there to protect our shins. And here is the other shoe. And they're touching, see? And this negative space in here, it is similar to this negative space in here. It's longer, but the shape is very similar. You see that? It's just this part is so much longer. So use those reference points, use your plumb line, use your center front, your side seam, kind of work all that together, keep referencing back and forth, you know, work your proportions. And this is why visual reference is so important. And then we have this beautiful sketched out kind of craziness. Again, I like to flip her over so that I can look for errors, okay? It's really the best way. And then we can start cleaning up the figure. I actually want to elongate her neck a tiny bit. She is a fashion figure. So I'm gonna pick up her head. I'm not gonna make it bigger. I'm gonna raise the whole head. There's her clavicle. See how this point is kind of the midway point of her upper arm? So I'm going to drop this and give her a little bit more rib cage. You know, you can't really see it maybe on camera, but there's her arm. And her butt does stick out a little bit past her wrist. So I'm going to do that. With side view legs, you have this curving out, your quad, and then it dips in, and then you're gonna see a more sharp angle for your kneecap. You're gonna dip in, and you're gonna have the softest, gentlest outward curve for your shin. I drew too much. The softest. It does make a difference though. And then on the outside here, we have your bum. Dip. You're going to have that dip under your butt, and then your leg is going to curve out for your hamstring. The back of your knee is straight. Well, if your leg is straight, obviously. Okay. Back of your leg is straight. There's that high curve of the calf. You're going to see that little ankle bone sitting in there. And there's your foot. And I have a whole video on how to draw feet. You're going to see maybe that little crease sometimes. You're going to see your kneecap sometimes. Again, curving out. A little bit of a sharp angle for your kneecap. See how this point, it's like past the halfway point. So here's the halfway point of her thigh. So we're going to have that juncture underneath it like that. There's her kneecap. Etc., etc. And there's your 11 head proportion figure for this pose. As usual, please do drop me all your questions in the comment section below. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful or entertaining or something. Share, subscribe, hit that notification bell because apparently the subscribe button is useless, meaningless without the notification bell. Remember, hashtag always be practicing, hashtag practice not magic, hashtag it's hard because it's hard, not because there's anything wrong with you, hashtag if your first one sucks, you're right on track, hashtag Zoe has all the ridiculous hashtags, and I will see you in the next video.